Thank you so much, Carolina. Also, hello. I hope everyone is doing well after the break and the cake, and that was great. Thank you so much to the people who have agreed to be on this panel. We have James at the end there, Dominique, Jan, Miles, and Maggie. And yeah, let's get started with this. Does everyone have their mic on?
Yes.
Yes.
Hello.
Hey, we all have mics. This is going to be really exciting. I think the question that a lot of people, if they haven't heard about the TC39, the first time that they saw it was on the schedule, they're going to be wondering, what is this thing? So who would like to take that on?
So TC39 is the standards committee that defines JavaScript. So it's been around basically as long as the language has been. We meet every 2 months for 3 days, and we talk about potential changes to the language. So this is the group that designed ES6, and it's also designed async await. The spec is designed on GitHub. And
yeah, the other thing is TC39 works on JavaScript standardization, which is distinct from web standardization, which is done by other standards orgs. So you know, a lot of the APIs that you use, maybe you're not sure. You know, set timeout. Often people aren't sure, but that's actually a web API. The things in the JavaScript language are actually pretty small, and so we're focused a lot on language features, syntax, and a very small core library.
I think one thing that I heard also was like JavaScript is really a standalone language. It is used on the web, but it's really like something that you can use anywhere. Maybe one thing that people might be interested in is like, what is a standard actually? What does that mean?
Well, standard's just a document that describes what a certain thing is, what's supposed to happen when you execute some code in the example of a programming language. Standard really takes relevance when it corresponds to implementations, when it's a design that everyone agrees on and that people can actually take advantage of. There are lots of standards that you can find if you search around, and some of them are outdated, and some of them were just fantasy. I think the JavaScript standard that TC39 produced does a really good job of striking a balance between continuing to add new things and also maintaining relevance through certain processes.
The term standard tends to be overused in a lot of contexts. It's essentially a document that describes the way something should happen. It doesn't necessarily describe the way things actually happen, the way the implementers have done it. But it is the set of rules for, you know, if you're going to do this, do it like this.
The other cool thing about JavaScript having a standard and having a pretty solid one is this is actually unusual among a lot of languages. So, you know, languages, I hope I'm not inaccurate here, but my understanding is languages like Ruby and Python do not have a standard. They have the original implementation, and everybody who wants to have like something compatible with those just kind of reverse engineers it. And you know, maybe this is okay for a mostly server language, but for something where we have 4 independent competing implementations at least in the browser and elsewhere, it's really important to have a central document that says everybody should be working the same way.
Something that's particularly unique about JavaScript standard is that the standard actually leads the language. So the C# programming language, I work for Microsoft, I have tons of interaction with .NET, they have a standard as well, but they actually make the standard after they create the programming language. And in JavaScript, we have the opposite happening. We create the standard, and then the engines pick it up and implement it. So that's a very unusual characteristic that has to do with the nature of the web.
So I think it's also really interesting that you mentioned that you're working with Microsoft, but on the TC39, which stands for Technical Committee 39, you are representing the JS Foundation, right? Can you talk a bit about how you got involved in the committee and also representing the group that you do?
Sure. So one thing everyone should know is that some people up on this stage do have academic backgrounds in language design and extensive work there, but that's not like a requirement for TC39. For me, I am a very average full-stack web developer for Microsoft. I work in crisis management. It has nothing to do with language design at all. I'm nowhere near the language design teams at Microsoft. And I maintain Moment.js, the datetime library. And what I found was that the reason Moment exists is because the date functionality in JavaScript is very bad. And I started like running around Microsoft when I first started working there a year ago, and I was like, does anybody care? Is anybody going to fix the date? It's still broken. And nobody, I won't say nobody did. Actually, Brian Turleson, who's Microsoft's representative to TC39, was like, I care a lot about that. Like when he and I found each other, he was like, let's get this done. And so then at that point, I had to find a way to get there. And the JS Foundation, again, the JS Foundation is a open source foundation that supports the needs of many of the major open source libraries in the JavaScript ecosystem. So jQuery, all of the jQuery family is under JS Foundation. Lodash, Grunt, Webpack, they're all under JS Foundation. And they said, if you care so much about the standard, we can send you to go represent our libraries. And that's how I ended up there.
Awesome, thank you. We have some people who've been working on the committee for like varying periods of time. So like Maggie, you've recently joined, and we also have Dominic, who's been a part of TC39 for quite a few years. Can you talk about your experience joining, and what was TC39 like before?
Yeah, it's kind of funny to think. I guess I'm one of the people who's been on the committee longest on this panel. There is a lot of new faces. So I still feel like I'm relatively new. There are a lot of people who are on the committee and very well established. But my story, I was a web developer using JavaScript. I got kind of involved in the language just through curiosity. I was like, oh, I learned about all these new features. Like, when are they coming? What's the deal? I hear Firefox has like let and const. Why aren't they in the language? Eventually, one area I got really involved in was asynchronous APIs and promises, and there was a push to put these in the web platform somehow, either through the DOM APIs or through the language. I thought it would work really well in the language, and I live in New York. There was a meeting in Boston, a TC39 meeting, and so I took some time off work, took the bus up there, presented my written up, fairly formal spec on how promises should work in JavaScript, and the committee was like, "This is pretty good. Let's get this into ES6." So after that was just the beginning of a long journey and a lot of arguments on committee and mailing lists. and promises were certainly not without controversy, but I think they've been pretty successful. After I stayed involved. I did a lot of this in my free time. I got involved in other web standards, and eventually Google hired me to represent them in TC39 and represent them in other web standards bodies and do this full time. So that was my journey. It's pretty great.
I just want to touch super quickly on you're talking about getting features into the spec. Can you say a bit about that process? Like, where do you start, and what steps do you go through to get something into the spec?
Yeah, so there is a whole formal process, but to boil it down to its essentials, the first step is to explain the feature, explain what it would look like, in use by developers. What needs does it address? Is this something that exists in other languages? What cross-cutting concerns might it have across the rest of the language that exists? And generally try and convince people that this is a good idea and that your solution to the problem is the right way to solve the problem. And then you kind of just advance through the stages of increasingly formalizing your proposal, writing actual spec text, bringing it to the committee and getting it increasingly checked and solidified along the way.
There's a multi-stage process where the proposal is put out there, and in order to advance to the next step, there has to be a certain amount of implementation experience, right? And as it advances, the spec needs to reflect what is actually implemented. So that way, when it actually comes out at the other end, you know that it actually matches what users are going to be using out in the world. So,
and that's somewhat new. Like ES6 was the spec led the implementations. Now they're much more in tandem, which is very healthy. I could go into that a lot. I won't.
So we also have this concept of a champion, someone who picks up a spec. Maggie, would you be able to speak about that at all?
Sure. So the whole, I guess, reason that I ended up at TC39 at all, which actually is a lot like Dominic's reason, is that I cared a heck of a lot about one thing. So for the moment, I am the champion or the person who is responsible for moving forward the fixing of date in the language. And I share that responsibility with Brian Charlson at Microsoft. And to get a proposal moved forward through the process, you have to find someone willing to champion that proposal. Now, many people on TC39 represent browser implementers or other large corporations, so we have a few people from Google here. In my case, I actually would be the person who would represent you. Because I represent the JS Foundation, which is basically, we think of ourselves as the community at large. But to get a proposal through, you need to find a champion, and that would be the person who either represents you as part of your organization, Microsoft, Mozilla, Google, etc. Or if you don't have a large organization to rep, then come find me. Or Leo Belter, who also reps JSF.
Awesome. There are obviously things that are under development right now, like things that each of you are super excited about. What is the most exciting thing that's coming up in the next spec? What's in development right now?
Well, for me, it's not necessarily what's coming up soon. It's what already was developed, and that's modules, right? I've been working very hard with some other folks in the Node community to actually get modules into Node, and they are coming. It's going to take a long time, but they are coming. But yeah, that's the thing I'm most excited about seeing advance. So.
Yeah, I mean, like James, coming from the browser perspective, I also am spending a lot of time getting modules. You know, we put out the syntax for them in ES6, but no semantics. So, you know, saying modules were in ES6 is not really true. In a large sense. So we're finally getting to that point. I spent a lot of time on that. I've also worked on shared array buffer, which is the subject of an upcoming talk. We had a lot of fun. Again, it's similar in that it needs to integrate into the web platform. We need to say, you know, what threads can you actually share this shared array buffer between? And that's not a question for the language. That's a question for the thing that defines the threads, web workers, and so on, the web platform. Finally, I'm also championing a proposal called async iteration, which we can talk about more offline, but I think it's really cool.
Well, one smaller thing I'm working on is features for regular expressions. This allows you to do things like reference Unicode categories for characters in a regular expression, or also give names to groups that are being captured, and a couple other things. So I'm definitely excited about that. And implementation is in V8 behind a flag. And I'm also working on a specification for big ints, for arbitrary size integers in JavaScript with operator overloading. And also some features for classes. So I'm definitely interested in getting more feedback from this whole group on all these.
Work on the big int stuff before the classes.
So what I'm most excited about right now is actually not a feature of the language, but I'll call it a feature of the committee. There's a lot of work going on right now for a code of conduct within TC39. And that is interesting because many code of conducts are about conduct of a community, which is very different than conduct of a committee. So it's interesting to try to reconcile the differences between this and find the language that works. But it's being put through the process, and I would say I've only been to 3 meetings, but I've seen the conduct change just with this being on the table.
I suppose it's obvious I'm excited about date. I do want to mention, along with the 262 specification for the JavaScript programming language, TC39 also handles ECMA 402, which is the internationalization APIs, like the INTL dot stuff. Coming from the datetime space, the moment.js space, this stuff is really important. I'm really excited for everything that's going on in Intel because it's really going to help people produce more global applications.
That's fantastic. We also have a number of questions. So we we sourced a number of questions from you people, the community, through this hashtag TC39QS. And I'm just going to read out a couple of them because I think there are a few that we can cover in this panel. Unfortunately, the panel is very short because like all of these topics are fascinating and could be a talk all on their own. So we selected a couple of those questions that we could answer in the time that we have, and I'm just going to ask a couple of them now. So one of the questions we were asked was, what is the state of the bind operator, and what needs to be done to advance it? That came from Tobias Beniek. I'm going to mispronounce that, I'm so sorry.
All right, I can take this. So the bind operator is a fairly popular proposal. Briefly, the idea is, it combines several ideas into one. You want this method chaining syntax so that you can define things in another library, but use them as if they're methods on an existing library. So that in other languages, this might be called extension methods, or something like that. And this is a pretty great idea because then you could define something like Lodash, but use it as if it were on a native array, as if they were methods. It also gives you syntactic sugar for binding and extracting methods and a number of other things. And there's variants of this. There's one that's a pipeline operator where the bind operator uses this, the pipeline operator uses the first argument, like Lodash. The problem is it's this complicated space with a lot of decisions about, well, do we really want to tie it to this or the first argument? Do we really want to tie binding into the story, or do we want to make it more general? And every time somebody's tried to pick this up, there's so many people who feel the opposite way. Largely in the community. The committee, I think, would be open to anything if we had a clear signal from the community. In my perspective, it's been kind of discouraging to try and get it moving forward. The other thing is we've had champions, but I think they've gotten discouraged. I don't know if that's fair in Dan's estimation.
I would just want to phrase what Dominic is saying is this is a big opportunity for community involvement and more direction. Yeah, but it's a positive. Where the committee is definitely interested in this proposal once we have more of these kinds of signals. So. Yeah.
Standards that are made without community involvement are not good standards. Period.
I think, yeah, that's a very good point, because there is sort of an issue with that. Not many people know about this committee, and they don't know how to get involved with it, and this is also an opportunity for us to get more people involved. James, I'm actually going to direct this at you because you mentioned modules, and someone has asked, what is the status of ES interop, module interop? And it's been raised in discussion many times, and they're just wondering what the status is.
So this is an area where the browsers are definitely ahead of Node. I know that there's still some variance in the browsers, and Dominic could speak to that better than I could. As far as Node implementation, we're a long way off. We're about at least a year until we have something that the community would be able to work with, but we're working on it. It's going to get there. There's a lot more issues on the servers on the Node side that the browsers just don't have to deal with. So it's a very difficult technical problem. Once we get there, I think by the time we get there, the browsers will be like, what took you so long? And we'll be able to ensure pretty good interop, but yeah.
Yeah, from the browser side, we're trying to do as much as we can to iron out the bugs in the underlying infrastructure, so that when Node is able to tackle it, we can say, okay, it's ready for you. Again, it's just this multi-year process. First we had module syntax, and now we're getting module semantics for the browser. But really, semantics aren't bulletproof until you have them working in two environments. A single implementation of an interface is not a great interface. So it's a tough.
A big challenge here also is that ECMA 262 only defines like the semantics of modules, but nothing about the semantics for loading. And with the browser and Node being very different environments, there's different constraints. So the browser can't block the main thread while it's loading everything, so you have like this asynchronous load phase before a synchronous execute operation. Whereas the way require works is synchronous and synchronous execution through the whole tree as it's loading. So this isn't able, we can reconcile this, but it's just, it breaks my brain and many people's brains. And so it just takes a lot of time to find a way to do it that allows both the code in the browser and in Node to run similarly. And what we want to avoid is a case where you need to start worrying, is it running in Node or is it running in the browser?
I've published a couple articles on this on Medium. There's likely going to be another one within a couple of months, so small hint. So yeah, that'll give a pretty good update. I mean, this is the whole topic that can take a long time to discuss. So.
Please subscribe to his newsletter.
Also, another question that's coming up is, will you ever drop any features from JavaScript?
Yeah, I'll take this. So, from the Node perspective, just looking at Node, just Node. Whenever we try to deprecate something and even suggest that we might remove something, there's pitchforks and torches, and we have to go running. Imagine that on the language level. Probably not.
Yeah, I mean, think of it from a semantic versioning perspective. You know, Node gets to make breaking changes. It gets to say we've incremented our major version number, and now you have to look at the changelog and upgrade. Browsers don't. You know, your browser just updates every 6 weeks if you're lucky, every 6 months if you're not, and there's no choice. You don't get to look at the changelog. Your users certainly don't get to look at the changelog. So, from that perspective, browsers are always on major version 1.0.
On the other hand, it doesn't operate on a completely 100% strict, you're not going to see any changes that might break things. ES6 did make a whole bunch of changes that did break things, and browsers had to come back and say, look, we tried shipping this, and it actually broke things in a way that the committee didn't expect, because the committee didn't want to break things, it did want to stay compatible. So there was a sort of back and forth, and we arrived at a more compatible version. But there are also cases of breakage that are very strange, like adding a method to arrays is observed in some browsers to break their users, even if other browsers don't find it to be breaking. So what actually is a semver major change that we can't do is a little bit fuzzy.
But we're certainly and these are just tiny changes. We're not going to remove with or var or something.
All right, I think we're going to move over to one question coming from the community that will also take us into the next section, which is what, as a panel or as organizations or as people, are you doing to become more visible and better connected to the community?
I'll go ahead and take this one because this speaks to how I actually got involved. Last year, throughout Node and TC39's relationship, there's never really been a great relationship there. They weren't talking to one another. Here you had one of the most popular JavaScript platforms, right? And there was no connection, no communication going on with the community, or with the committee. And it really came to a head last year. There was just a ton of public arguing on Twitter, which is always a great fun. We came to realize that if Node wanted to engage, we needed to actually, show up in the meetings, get involved in discussions, provide feedback on the proposals as they were being proposed. It's a novel concept. It goes back to my earlier thing. A standard without community involvement is not good. Well, we needed to become involved, and it was literally just a matter of showing up. That was it.
So I think something that a lot of people would be interested in is what, as audience members, like, what can they do to, like, where can they go? Also myself, what can I look at? What's a great place to start getting involved?
Well, the standard is developed both in these in-person meetings and also on GitHub. It's developed with patches. You know, people can submit PRs. We do have a number of community contributors who are not committee members who do submit PRs and get real spec changes and really help us develop a lot of the difficult details with this specification. So there's one main repository for the master spec, and there's a bunch of smaller repositories for the proposals, which are not yet merged into the main spec. In these proposals, it's great if people file bugs or add issues or add comments to bugs to give feedback on the proposals. Some proposals are available in Babel or other cross-compilation environments, and you can use them in your own code and give feedback to us based on that, especially if you can do it in GitHub issues. That's the most accessible way to proposal champions.
The GitHub org is TC39, so github.com/TC39.
And I have to say, like, I guess over the course of my great many 3 years, this has been a big change, like both for TC39 and standard resource in general, but just in TC39, you know, the spec used to be developed in a Word document, which the editor kept on his computer and sent out to a mailing list once a month. So, you know, having a visible change list process where the community can submit pull requests and file issues is pretty great. I mean, there's a lot more we can do, but I hope that, you know, we're trying to meet you guys where you are, and certainly where I like to spend more of my day than instead of my inbox. So I'm pretty happy with the progress over the last few years.
One place that you can look as well is TC39/agendas. And on agendas, you can find the agendas of the next meetings. And this is a really great way to discover what language features are actively being developed. And because there's lots of different repos, it can be really hard to find a focus. So if you look in agendas, you can find that.
We're actually almost out of time. There is so much to discuss, and there's so much that we want to talk about. So I guess the best thing that we can do now is actually open up a space where if you have questions specifically to ask, then I believe we've chosen a location to sort of sit for a bit and take your questions. And that was I forget what it was.
We'll go to the community. All of us will be at the community space afterwards. And
I think we were going to go to the GCP booth.
Oh,
because there's stuff scheduled in the community booth that we don't want to overrun.
Google booth.
Google booth.
Google.
Yeah. So head over to the Google booth, and these wonderful folks will be there to answer more questions. There are lots of topics. There's also questions about diversity, work that's being done right now to open things up more, because the TC39 has been around for quite a while, but there are certain pertinent discussions that are still happening. And yeah, make yourself, if you have questions, come and ask, and feel free to get involved. Thank you.